All right, our next mentor text is A Long Way Home by Saru Brierley. And this book is about a kid. So Saru goes missing from India. He gets lost, and then he ends up getting adopted by a family from Australia. And then this book is about him finding his way back to his birth family. So he gets lost, adopted, and then ends up coming back home. So hence the title. But I'm going to be reading an excerpt from the chapter Getting Lost. Some of my most vivid memories are the days I spent watching over my baby sister, Shaquila, her grubby face smiling up at me as we played peekaboo. She always looked at me with adoring eyes, and it made me feel good to be her protector and hero. In the cooler seasons, Shaquila and I spent many nights waiting alone in the chilly house, like newly hatched chicks in a nest, wondering if our mother would come home with some food. When no one came, I'd get the bedding out, just a few ragged sheets, and cuddle with her for warmth. During the hot months of the year, my family would join the others with whom we shared the house and gather together outside in the courtyard, where someone played the harmonium and others sang. I had a real sense of belonging and well-being on those long, warm nights. If there was any milk, the women would bring it out, and we children got to share it. The babies were fed first, and if any was left over, the older ones got a taste. I loved the lingering sensation of its sticky sweetness on my tongue. On those evenings, I used to gaze upward, amazed at how spectacular the night sky was. Some stars shone brightly in the darkness, while others merely blinked. I wondered why flashes of light would suddenly streak across the sky for no reason at all, making us ooh and ah. Afterward, we would all huddle together, bundled up in our bedding on the hard ground before closing our eyes in sleep. That was in our first house, where I was born, which we shared with another Hindu family. Each group had their own side of a large central room with brick walls and an unsealed floor made of cow pats and mud. It was very simple, but certainly no chawl. Those warrens of slums were the unfortunate families of the megacities like Mumbai and Delhi found themselves living. Despite the closeness of the quarters, we all got along. My memories of that time are some of the happiest. My mother, Kamala, was a Hindu and my father a Muslim, an unusual marriage at the time and one that didn't last long. My father spent very little time with us. I later discovered he had taken a second wife, and so my mother raised us by herself. My mother was very beautiful, slender, with long, lustrous black hair. I remember her as the loveliest woman in the world. She had broad shoulders and limbs made of iron from all her hard work. Her hands and face were tattooed, as was the custom, and most of the time she wore a red sari. I don't remember much about my father since I only saw him a few times. I do recall that he wore white from top to bottom, his face was square and broad, and his curly dark hair was sprinkled with gray. As well as my mother and my baby sister Shaquila, whose name was Muslim, unlike ours, there was also my older brothers, Guda and Kalu, whom I loved and looked up to. Guda was tall and slim with curly black hair down to his shoulders. He was light-skinned and his face resembled my mother's. Usually he wore short shorts and a white shirt. All our clothes were hand-me-downs from the neighbors. But because of the heat, we didn't need much. Kula was heavier than Guda, broad from top to bottom with thin hair. On the other hand, I had short, straight, thick hair, and I was extremely skinny as a child. My face resembled my father's more than my mother's. When my father did live with us, he could be violent, taking his frustrations out on us. Of course, we were helpless, a lone woman and 4 small children. Even after he moved out, he wanted to get rid of us altogether. At the insistence of his new wife, he even tried to force us to leave the area so that he could be free of the burden that our presence brought to bear. But my mother had no money to leave, nowhere to live, and no other way to survive. Her small web of support didn't extend beyond our neighborhood. Eventually, my father and his wife quit the area themselves and moved to another village, which improved things for us a bit. The two things that I want to look at in terms of this book is how he uses M dashes. So M dashes are the longer dashes. The shorter ones are called N dashes or hyphens. And so it's EM and then N dash is EN is how it's spelled. but how the M dashes are being used here. When no one came, I'd get the bedding out, just a few ragged sheets, and cuddle with her for warmth. So what the M dashes are doing here is clarifying something. So he's telling us what the bedding is. And then later, we see this happen quite a lot, where things are being defined. So he says that his mother is Hindu and his father is a Muslim, and then says that that's an unusual marriage for the time. So it's whenever he's kind of breaking the story to tell the reader something. So that's what the M dash is for. The other thing that I want us to look at is the use of color. So we have several times throughout the story where things are described, but not in depth, but the descriptions are just using basic colors. So we have her black hair, we have the red sari, we have the father who's wearing white all the time, or his dad with the curly hair was sprinkled with gray. His brother's light-skinned and wears short shorts but a white shirt. So just using those very basic adjectives that are colors, and then what those colors are going to symbolize later. So in the book, he doesn't have that vivid memories of his father, probably because his father was very plain, wearing all white, but he remembers his mom's red sari and her black hair. That's a very vivid image for him. And we want to remember that he was a child when he got lost. He was a very young boy. So these descriptions are things that a child would notice, like colors. Colors are something that they can comprehend and explain, so colors are a great way to describe something from your very early years. So those are the two things we're going to play with: M dashes and then using just a color as your description. So grab your paper and we'll get started.